All right. Thank you everyone so much for joining. This is the Successful Sample Meetings webinar hosted by your Club Growth Director, Ali Dunn, and my co-host, Sean De Silva. Successful sample meetings from start to finish for District 31 leaders. So today, I'd like to go over our agenda in the beginning. First, we're going to talk about why sample meetings, why are they important, why do we hold them. We'll go over a little bit about how leads work, how we get leads in, the purpose of sample meetings, as well as the roles and responsibilities during sample meetings. And that includes the before section, the during the meeting part, and then after the meeting. And then we'll open it up for the Q&A. So let's talk about why be part of a sample meeting. I know a lot of you that are on the webinar right now have already participated in sample meetings, some recently, some have been part of sample meetings for a while now. So a good thing to always remember is tying it back to why sample meetings are good for you, good for the district, and good for the prospect group. Number one, you're developing your leadership and communication skills, as we all know at Toastmasters, and that's kind of our overarching goal here as part of Toastmasters is not to only become a better speaker, but also a better leader. So sample meetings can really help you out with that. Number two, you're expanding your network. A lot of sample meetings happen at corporations, professional cultures, community clubs. So it's a really nice way to expand your network outside of those that you might just normally talk to day in and day out. Also, you can earn credit for HPLs. You can earn credit to become a club sponsor and a club mentor. So sample meetings are a really nice segue into those opportunities. It's a nice way to kind of start to get to know a specific club or a prospective group. And if you're thinking about becoming a club sponsor or mentor, it's a good way to do so, as well as earning HPL credit too. And you can also earn credit towards becoming a distinguished area or division. So I know a lot of area directors and division directors like to be involved in sample meetings as well. And if that involvement turns into a charter club, you often will receive credit for becoming a distinguished area or division. Let's talk a little bit about how leads work. There are really two main ways that we get leads for District 31. The first way is through Toastmasters International, and it's a software called Insightly. And basically, anytime someone reaches out to Toastmasters International headquarters, they filter that down to me as the District 31 Club Growth Director if the person has notified that they're in the Eastern Massachusetts or Rhode Island area. And then I get an email from that person asking to contact them. And the other side of it is we get leads from all of you. You guys are experienced Toastmasters, and you have your own networks as well. And we've seen a lot of people that start clubs based on the people that they know, or they switch jobs, and the corporation that they've moved to doesn't have a Toastmasters club, so they tell the district, hey, we'd love to start a club at ABC Corporation, and that's another way that leads work. So you have those two different sides. Typically, the expected timeline around once a lead comes in, it tends to differ depending on the situation. Usually we, Samson and I, my club extension chair, Samson Guttakar, will typically try to reach out to a lead that comes in within 24 to 48 hours, just as a standard protocol, so that people feel like their message was well received, and they know that someone has gotten it, and we're willing to work with them to create a Toastmasters program. So the purpose of a sample meeting is kind of twofold. There's the purpose for the prospective group, and that may be either a corporation or a community. And there's also a purpose for current Toastmasters and District 31. So obviously, as you all know, the Toastmasters District 31 mission is to make sure that we're growing clubs and maintaining existing clubs. And we're achieving excellence through those two actions. And therefore, you know, we have that dual purpose between District 31 wanting to make sure that we're growing and thriving, and then other prospects who want to make sure that they're bringing Toastmasters into their current world or program. One of the things that I've heard a few times actually, and it's always good to keep in mind when you're starting the sample meeting process, is, and I've seen this a bunch of times actually in person, is when you present at a sample meeting, what people tend to see at that meeting is typically what ends up becoming ingrained in their club culture. So if at a sample meeting, you make it a point to make sure that all of the roles that are going to be part of that meeting are explained at the beginning, and people know what the timer is, what the grammarian does, what the evaluator is supposed to do. Those things, if they're done at the sample meeting, tend to translate into a practice that you know, is prosperous for that club later on down the road. They get used to it, they saw it in the beginning, so they'll continue to do it once they charter. So for the sample meeting, there are these 7 roles and their responsibilities. So you all know all these 7 roles. I think the one thing that I'd like to touch upon specifically is the team lead or Toastmaster. And I think that for those of you that are part of the DEC, area and division directors, you may have seen an email from me recently about the introduction of this idea of a team lead. I know we have a team lead actually on the phone with us tonight who's going to be leading a sample meeting later in January. But essentially a team lead, the purpose of the role is really to make sure that I, as club growth director, have a contact to put in touch with the group's contact, and that the group contact feels as if they have a go-to person. And the team lead is responsible for doing a lot of the behind-the-scenes work, helping to draft the agenda, making sure everyone is aware of all the meeting details beforehand, making sure that the meeting is executed smoothly, and then some follow-ups after the fact. So the team lead is often the Toastmaster. They can be simultaneous, but it doesn't always have to be that way, but it's something that we see often. And then of course you have your test speaker. Table topics master is always nice to have someone who is experienced, especially if you're a team lead and you're gearing up for a meeting. It's always nice to have a table topics master who is experienced and has gone through the table topics process a few times, so that they know how to engage the audience. They gently, but at the same time, aren't too afraid to pick on people, so that they get people up and excited about it. I'd just like to say, this past week we had a sample meeting at Criteo, and Anthony Alexander was our table topics master, and he did a fantastic job, you know, getting the audience involved. Obviously, some people were a little bit shy, but he had a really nice way of bringing people up without making them feel intimidated. So it's always nice to have that. Your general evaluator will obviously lead the evaluation portion of the meeting. Also at this past meeting, I'll use Criteo as an example again. The speech evaluator is a role that should always remain positive overall. You know, very often when you have a new group that wants to charter a Toastmasters program, it's important that they understand that the evaluation portion of Toastmasters is often kind of, for lack of a better phrase, where you're getting your money's worth, right? Because anyone can go and give speeches and, you know, but if you're not getting that true feedback, it's not always worth as much. So Toastmasters provides that platform for giving a great evaluation, but in the context of sample meetings, it's always best to just have a practice of positive speech evaluations overall, so that people who are listening and watching feel as if this is a safe zone. Toastmasters truly is kind of a judge-free environment where I want to continue and practice being a better public speaker and leader. Of course, you have your all-counter grammarian. Always good to remind the all-counter grammarian to make sure that they've prepared a word of the day in advance. And it's up to them how they'd like to present that, whether it's just verbally or if they want to bring a sheet of paper to write that word of the day down and share with the group, or if you know that the group is going to have some kind of projector available, you could coordinate that in some slides if you like. And then, of course, the timer, who it's always good to coordinate with them on making sure that they either have green, yellow, and red cards available, and if they don't, figuring out a different plan so that someone else can bring them for that meeting. So as I mentioned before, there's kind of three main chunks to great sample meetings. There's the before section, which is the preparation, the during section, which is when the meeting's actually happening, and then the after section. So first we're going to move into the before section where all the preparation happens. So I, as a club growth director, the process will be that I introduce the team lead to the main contact at the prospective group, and that is usually via email. That way the team lead is familiar with the group and the main contact feels as if they have someone that they can go to ask questions or anything like that. Second, since we do have the new introduction of the master demo meeting tracker, I, as club growth director, will be notifying all of you, the district, the division and area directors, that a new sample meeting has been entered into the master demo meeting tracker, and to sign up if you have availability or if you know anyone maybe in that area where the sample meeting will be held that might be available. The next step in the process is that the team lead will draft the agenda for the sample meeting, and I have all the templates for those. Typically, or ideally rather, we like to draft the agenda around a week prior. Just for reference and background for all of you, when a lead comes in and we first start talking about the idea of maybe holding a sample meeting, Samson or I, whoever is talking to the lead, typically asks for at least 3 weeks of lead time. So let's say we spoke to a prospect today on January 8th. We would ask that the group decide not to hold a sample meeting until probably the first week of February. So that gives us enough time and gives you enough time to prepare, bring together an experienced group of people and really put on a great sample meeting for the group. So that gives you a little bit of context in terms of drafting the agenda should happen within about a week of when the actual meeting is going to happen. Club Growth Director remains responsible at an overarching level for completing the actual sample meeting team and getting everyone together. And of course, if the team lead is selected early on in the process, they can assist as needed. Next step in the process is that the team lead will email the sample meeting team with all those little reminders, including the final agenda. This ideally will happen at least 24 hours prior so that everyone feels like they have the information they need in a timely manner. And then the team lead will also email the contact at the group or at the prospect with those same reminders. This will be touched upon in the next slide, but it's always a good idea for the team lead to include the roster of names from the Toastmasters team, because often, especially if it's going to be a corporate sample meeting, you'll need those names for a security list. And of course, throughout all of this communication, the club growth director will be included in on those emails in that communication. So just to dive into a little bit more detail, in terms of the before process coordinating with the prospective contact, the team lead introduces themselves. We talked about the notice time, reminding them of the specifics of the date, time, and location, all these little things. Sometimes if you're having a sample meeting in Boston, always good to make sure that that group tells you about their parking situation, and then you relay that to the team, depending on, if people don't have cars or if they tend to take public transportation, which is better. All these little logistic things, but they still add up and make a big difference. So it's always good to touch upon them and make sure that the communication is open. Usually, we prefer to make sure that the prospective group has the agenda the day prior, and then typically they usually print the agenda because they're the ones that kind of know how many people will be attending the meeting. They have an idea in their mind of who they've invited and how many people will be in attendance. So they're usually always fine with printing those agendas. A couple of other details here about making sure you're aware of how many seats are there, so you can figure out logistics. We talked about the names being sent to security, agendas, and contact information, which they will have. And then coordinating with the sample meeting team, it's always good for the sample meeting team lead to make sure that everyone that's on the team knows who each other are. And of course, making sure that everyone can be in attendance a few days prior is always a good idea to double check. We already spoke about sending the agenda and then the responsibilities, which we've touched upon as well. So this slide is a little bit repetitive, but it's nice just to have it in a little bit more detail. So we've prepared for our sample meeting. We're ready to go. It's the day of, and you arrive at your sample meeting. What are some of the best practices during that meeting? I've been part of many sample meetings, and I've heard a lot of great feedback about some best practices for while you are actually at the sample meeting. So I wanted to share that with all of you. Always a good thing to remember, the team lead is really who is in charge on site. So always remembering that the group, the Toastmasters group, should be empowering and supporting that team lead in their decisions. And, if you have to ad lib or, kind of pivot on a dime, follow the Toastmaster or the team lead, just to make sure that everyone appears cohesive to the prospective group and that all of us Toastmasters look like we're on the same page. As I mentioned before, it's always a good idea for each role to be explained to some extent. Now, I know every group does this a little bit differently. Personally, I belong to Boston Toastmasters, and we didn't used to introduce the timer and the grammarian at the beginning of the meeting, but we've recently changed that. And I think it's added a lot more, especially for the guest experience. And, when you're thinking about it, sample meetings are all guests. So always making an effort to have those roles explained during the meeting is a really good practice. And it doesn't have to mean that you get every single role up at the beginning to say 2 words about their role. It could be timer and grammarian, come up first, quickly explain what they're going to be doing so the speaker and the table topics participants know. And then when the table topics master comes up, maybe he or she can just quickly explain what they're going to do. Always really nice to have that high involvement in the table topics section. And I really think that the table topics is where a lot of the magic happens within sample meetings. And the reason being is Toastmasters or future Toastmasters, I feel like, are at these sample meetings to get some kind of feeling out of it. And they want to feel as if they come out of this meeting inspired and motivated to become a better public speaker, a better leader, even if they've already filled out an application and this is kind of just the cherry on top. So having people get up in front of the group and be a part of table topics is so huge. I'll give you guys an example. About a year ago, I went to a sample meeting at AMRI, as a pharmaceuticals company. And I remember one of the women, I was the table topics master, and one of the women I called up, and she was visibly really shy, and she was a little bit nervous. And I talked about, what was the resolution that you have for this year? And she kind of blurted out, well, I want to drink less wine. And after the fact, she was probably felt a little bit embarrassed because she had said in front of her coworkers that I want to drink less wine. But in the end of the meeting, I will tell you that she was the first one to round everybody up and say, hey, let's start this. I want to be an officer. I am so gung-ho about this. Let's get it. And I truly believe that part of that is because she was able to get up there and speak and felt that empowerment. So table topics, I could go on, but I think it's a really important piece. So always try to get as much involvement as you can. And if you have to go over a couple minutes to add one extra table topic, feel free. Post-meeting availability is a big piece that I've been seeing more recently in some sample meetings. At Criteo this past week, actually, they had already determined their officers, and they decided we'd love to have the Toastmasters sample meeting crew sit down with us for about 15 to 20 minutes afterwards and tell us a little bit about our roles. We've already selected them, but what do they mean? How are we going to succeed at them? Give us a little bit of insight into what the VP Ed does or what VP PR does. It was a really nice way for us not only to connect with those officers, but also to show them the value of the roles that they've signed up for. Explaining common Toastmasters gestures, I've tried to make a habit of this in some sample meetings because a lot of times, especially if you're at a corporate sample meeting, I think that sometimes corporate cultures aren't as readily excited to clap as much as Toastmasters do in their Toastmasters meetings. And so sometimes I kind of try to make a joke about it, or I'll say, just so you guys know, we do clap a lot, and it actually sometimes says that on the back of our agendas. But it's always good to kind of explain to the audience that we love to clap, we encourage clapping, and handshakes as well, because they're going to see a lot of it during the meeting. So you might as well call it out, let people know, have them jump on the bandwagon with you, and that ends up just feeling even more like you know, like a cohesive group of people and everyone's on board together. Reading the room and adapting, you know, if you notice, one of the things I like to say, not just the team lead, but all of the Toastmasters volunteers, especially, really just make sure that you're kind of keeping an eye on the room, seeing what people are doing. Are they paying attention? Do they look like they're excited about it? Are they kind of drifting off? Just keeping in mind those little cues and keeping your eye on the room can make a big difference, not only for after the fact, but during as well. So if you feel like, you know, you're losing some people, kind of bring it back or inject some humor into the meeting, just all about kind of thinking on your feet. Also, discussing reminders with your prospect ahead of time. One of these things came up at a meeting that I was at recently. Always good to just remind maybe your club contact that to silence phones, refrain from video, those typical things that you usually hear in your own Toastmasters meeting. And if they're going to go up there and give a quick introduction and then introduce you as a team lead or Toastmasters volunteers, then they can mention it to their crew, and then they've already done that job for you. One of the things I like to do is to have table topics that are a little bit sometimes planned. And what I mean by that is, if you think that it might be a group where they're going to be shy and maybe not coming up right away, always have kind of a backup plan. So if you have to, you know, coordinate with your table topics master to say, hey, you know, Jane, if no one's raising their hand, will you be my guinea pig and do the first table topic to show people that it's not that scary, it's just a minute up there. And the same thing for Q&A section as well. We usually like to leave about 10 minutes at the end of the sample meeting to talk about general Q&A from everyone that's attended. And if no one asks any questions or it's kind of just crickets, good idea to have kind of a question planned in your back pocket where an existing volunteer can ask another volunteer, hey, what have you gotten out of Toastmasters? Can you tell the group how it's helped your life professionally and personally? And that's a great way to just launch the Q&A section. And at the end, always nice to ask for a group photo. We encourage that. We've taken a few at the sample meetings we've done this year. It's a nice way to make everyone feel appreciated, and you know, we might do a collage later, so we'll see. After the sample meeting, so your sample meeting is complete, you've done the heavy lifting. Now this is the new section of your journey where the execution is over, and now we have to work to help this group actually become chartered. We like to have our sample meeting attendees send their general evaluations to both club growth director and or the club sponsors. So tell us about what you enjoyed during that meeting. What went well? What could be an area for improvement? Did something not run as smoothly as you may have envisioned? Or did someone do particularly well at their role that you liked and you want to see that practice done again at future sample meetings? Or were you talking to someone, part of the prospective group after the fact, and they mentioned, you know, they're involved in another type of public speaking program, you know, how is Toastmasters impressed them versus what they've already seen, what's out there. So always just looking for feedback on how the sample meeting went. And then another good practice, which I mentioned before, is to sit with, potential or already designated officers and provide that knowledge on what the roles entail is a nice way for the group to feel like you're there for them, you're a resource. They have a lot of people at their fingertips. And then the last piece is following up with your prospective group after the meeting has happened. It's always given that you're going to want to thank the prospect for hosting us, for their hospitality, for bringing us in and sharing Toastmasters with their group. Even if you think that their chances of chartering, are low or it might take a long time, it's always great to send a nice thank you note. That could either be picking up the phone or sending an email, and providing additional resources. It could be the How to Start a Club guide, or it could be directing them to the District 31 website or the Toastmasters International website. Make some notes during the meeting on what kind of came up during their Q&A and have a list that you can expand upon for them after the fact during your follow-up email. And then, of course, the team lead should ask for feedback from the prospective group. And that could be either email or phone. Sometimes you'll already have an idea of their level of interest and whether or not you think that they'll be proceeding with chartering a club soon, just based on how the meeting went. But always good to look for that feedback from the prospect as well. And it doesn't just have to be asking them, hey, do you think that you'll be working on the charter paperwork soon? What's your timeline look like? It can also just be candid, looking for feedback on what you thought of our team. What could we have done better for you? What are you looking forward to, moving forward? If we had done it again, what would you do differently? It's always good feedback just to have so we can constantly improve our sample meeting process. That concludes our slides section of our webinar. So what I'm going to do is turn off our recording so that we can move into the Q&A section of our meeting. So give me one moment.